Welcome, everybody. My name is Karen Pank. I'm the Executive Director for the Chief Probation Officers of California. And if you are here, you are hopefully planning on being a part of our afternoon webinar, which is yesterday, today, and tomorrow, looking into probation's past, present, and future. And first, a little bit of housekeeping to make sure everybody is square on the fact that we are recording the webinar, and we also do have the ability to receive questions in the Q&A. So please look for that function to type in any questions that you may have throughout the webinar. We'll be monitoring it and trying to take those questions as we go and try to get to as many of them as possible. We are really excited today to have yet again an esteemed panel to talk with all of you and to cover this really interesting topic. I've been very excited about kind of diving into this issue with these folks, and I really want to make sure folks understand. We'll go around the horn, so to speak. We'll do a little introduction of each one as we jump into a question. So kind of just you can try to guess as to who we're going to pick first. And in fact, we didn't even tell our panelists who's going to get to go first. So I'm sure they're waiting to see what's going to happen. But, you know, the reason we really were looking forward to doing today's topic is that we know how important, you know, we all know from our history lessons how important it is to learn from history, look at lessons learned in our past, just as it is important to ensure that we're accurately assessing the environment that we're in today. Those two things, you know, we're probably constantly doing, but we probably don't give ourselves enough time sometimes to look at where is our profession potentially going in the future. And, you know, it's really incumbent upon chiefs, but also really all of us to make sure, you know, that we are looking at those things, because our mission is so critical to really our having healthy and safe communities, that, you know, we need everybody kind of thinking through those things. And so at least for today, we'll get to hear from these five a little bit about what their thoughts are on some of those items. So wasting no further time, I think we'll go ahead and jump right into it. And with it, I'm going to take care of one last housekeeping, because I'm going to call on a retired chief first. Chief Mary Butler, recently retired chief, many of you know from Napa, and I'm going to have her do a little bit of an introduction of herself, but I will say that she is 17 years in probation and 17 years as chief. The one rule, though, Chief Butler, is you cannot talk about how wonderful retirement is, which I'm sure is in all of our futures, but we are trying to make sure that's not in anyone's near future. So that is off limits. But other than that, we will be happy to hear all about it. We do always try to sprinkle in some interesting factoids of our panelists, and we asked all of you what your favorite vacation spot is. I didn't really need to ask you this, because I heard all about Australia on a flight from Southern California one time, and I know that's your favorite spot. So that's the fun stuff about Chief Butler, but I'm sure there are more, and I would really love to dive into your first question. But before doing so, do you want to be sure you had a chance to say hello and see if there's any other important factoids we should start with before jumping in?
Well, I'm thrilled to be here, so thank you very much. And retirement isn't that great. That's why I keep coming back. You can't, you know, I just love coming back and being a part of a world that I just found really fun to be involved with. So for 17 years. Yes, I retired right before the pandemic. I could not have planned that any better. I do apologize to those in Napa, because was not an easy time to do a transition during that time. But I will say that my years in probation were exciting, although I think those of you who are there now have probably, even though I lived through earthquakes and fires and realignment and all the other changes that we went through. I did not have to go through a pandemic, and I don't envy any of you. And I was kind of glad to be sitting on the other side.
That's fair enough. I'm not sure what to take from the fact that you named a whole bunch of natural disasters and realignment all in the same sentence, but we'll tackle that perhaps through the rest of the hour and a half. But perhaps difficulties that we all have overcome, and so that may be one way to look at it. So we also asked you about maybe naming a pivotal person for you in your kind of role and journey in probation. You want to share that before jumping into the other question?
Sure. So I came to probation as the chief. That was kind of an unusual stepping stone. Most folks came up through probation. And I was really managing our mental health and child welfare department, both departments in Napa, when Judge Scott Snowden, who was the presiding judge at that time, came to me and said, "I'd like you to be our new chief probation officer," to which I didn't even know they were looking for one. But he said they had done several failed recruitments. They really wanted to go in a different direction. They had worked with me on many projects through mental health and child welfare. They knew me in court and thought I would be a great match. I actually turned them down the first 4 free lunches I got out of it. And then they finally did convince me. And I said, basically, I'll give you 5 years and then I'll go back to what I know and love. And they assured me that I was making not only the right decision, but that I would stay much longer. And every time I saw Judge Snowden, he reminded me it was the best decision he ever made, he said, was selecting me. He took credit for everything that happened. And he also reminded me that I still did stay way past my 5 years. So he was right. It was one of those, every time I saw him, you were right, I was wrong. That was the start of every conversation.
Well, that's right. Once you get bit by the probation bug, it seems like people do end up loving and staying with the profession. So, knowing that you've had 17 great years as chief and 17 great years in probation, and also served as CPOC president at one point in time. So I got a chance to work really closely with you during that time period. You've observed a lot of programs and policies having to be implemented over your career. When you're thinking through some of it, you might have thought of, looking in the past, what lessons learned from that? Were there any surprises? Do you have some examples that maybe you can share about some of those things for our audience?
Yeah, I actually had a couple of examples of programs that I wasn't so sure about. It's like, well, how is this going to go kind of thing? And the first one was extended foster care. When this rolled out, I really was excited that we were giving those youth that were in foster care more time within the system, housing options, ways, because I didn't really think we're at 18 or some 19, they just weren't ready. I was really concerned about the fact that youth who were on probation are typically quite happy to be done with probation. And I really wasn't convinced that they would want to stay with a probation officer so that they could be in this program. And I think what really spoke to and gives credit to the hard work that these probation officers did to not only engage these young adults, but to also help them really see the benefits. The numbers stun me. The number of youth that were willing to not only want to be a part of the program, but in Napa, 100% wanted to stay with their probation officer. They didn't want to switch. They didn't want to go to child welfare and get a social worker. They had a relationship. They had trust. And for these young adults, trust was something that was sometimes hard. They didn't trust easily. They'd been let down a number of times. So that was a program that was just incredibly successful. And really, despite some of the concerns I had, they were just not founded. So it was really great. Another one was the whole idea of, I was a true believer of evidence-based practices. I always thought that we should be looking at what works and really focusing on that kind of a thing. But when realignment came along and there was some pieces of realignment that said you will do evidence-based, I was a little concerned about some of the other law enforcement partners that we worked with and their willingness to buy into this. And I think CPOC here really led the way and made sure that the way realignment was rolled out gave probation a voice that sometimes we hadn't had, and also framed it in a way where everyone could be engaged. I think the executive committee really brought all those players together. And I was surprised, really, it's how quickly some of the other partners were willing to jump in. One example from Napa was we opened a day reporting center, and it took us a long time to get it open. We actually spent a year designing it. And our district attorney was probably the reason it took a year, because there was a lot of questions and we don't want to rush into this, and I don't think it's going to work kind of an attitude. And yet once the program started and they actually learned about it and went to the program and got the curriculum, they truly became the biggest supporter. They, management went back to all the deputy DAs and said, this is a program that works. This is a program you should want your folks to make sure it gets in that court order, make sure they go to that program. And really the other partners jumped in. We almost never had a graduation that wasn't filled with the board of supervisors and judges, the sheriff, the police chief, the district attorney, public offender, and really half of the probation staff were there, and sometimes even health and human services staff that some of these offenders also worked with, like mental health or drug and alcohol. And so it really did bring everybody together with the same goal. And so while I had great hope for it, I will say it happened much quicker than I would have thought. My third example is really Napa specific. And there are pluses and minuses to this one. It kind of goes on both sides. And that's, when I joined the department, it had gone through a number of changes, and both the judges and the board of supervisors said to me, one of the hottest topics in probation right now is arming. And let us be clear, Napa will never be armed, ever. And if I heard another ever, after many evers there. And so I catch on quick. I knew not to raise it right away, but it was a hot topic with staff. And, I had to say, not right now. And then when realignment came, it was very clear I had to make a different stand, and I had to step up and support staff and support the safety of the department. And so I started conversations with the judges and the board, starting to get some support. And then we actually had staff that weren't supportive, because there were some staff that didn't want to be armed and were afraid if they didn't get armed, they wouldn't be able to stay. We took care of that. And we had some clerical staff that said, well, this won't be safe if there's guns in the building, we'll have to quit. No one quit. So we were able to work through all of that. So, I wasn't terribly surprised that the judges came along so quickly, but I will say it was a little bit of a shocker that how long it took me to get the board to buy in, and really needed their buy-in for the money. I mean, let's face it, they did the budget, even though I was appointed by the judges. But they jumped in and said, whatever you need, we'll get in there. And it was kind of interesting because we had our sheriff's support. Our sheriff helped us write our policy and procedures. They helped us write up our training plan. And then as soon as it happened, they kind of did an about face and pulled out and said, we don't think you should be armed. And so that was a shocker to me. It was like, well, now what? Because we are. And everybody worked through it. And whether they loved it or didn't love it, we all accepted it. We partnered together. The line staff were great together, being out in the community together. And, I think the line police and sheriff deputies really appreciated that they no longer felt like they had to protect probation because they don't have their own guns. And so that part really worked out. And the last surprise, which again, you just never know, all of a sudden right now in Napa, the CEO has turned skeptical again. And as I was leaving was saying, well, I don't think maybe they do need those guns. So it was really interesting how people shift in their opinions and their views. But for me, the lesson really learned in all of that was if I hadn't had my facts in front of me and if I didn't have information to share, I don't know that it would have been as easy to have that conversation when it was started as a black and white and there is no conversation allowed. And I could take that to many other things. And I think that's a big lesson, is that sometimes the answer is no, and sometimes it's not now. And you just have to know when to push it and when to just sit for a bit.
Yeah, that's thanks for sharing all of those, because I think there's a very common theme throughout that, and probably throughout what we're going to talk about today, right? Which is, sometimes you're not sure about the direction that gets set. Sometimes it seems overwhelming. Sometimes the timing's not right. But in all three of those scenarios, you saw the profession kind of adapt and evolve to make the outcome much more successful, than maybe was even originally thought of going in. So hopefully that's what we'll see on some of the things that we're working on presently, and we'll be able to look back on some of those things in the future. I want to get a few others involved as well, and I'll turn to Chief Miracle. You're up next. You have 25 years in probation and 7.5 years as chief. I realize I probably shouldn't have asked the factoid of everybody as to what your favorite vacation spot, because now late on a Friday when it's super hot in the Sacramento area where I am at, I'm thinking all these vacation spots sound so nice, and but your favorite one is Hawaii. So that sounds like a lovely place for us to spend time in. But for now, we're here. And so we had also asked for you to share. Oh, and I should say, in case folks don't know, you're the chief in Kern County. I always assume everybody knows this, but so thank you for joining us today. Will you kind of share with us any other introductory remarks about yourself that I may have just missed, and then share about your pivotal person that you shared with us?
Well, first of all, just say it's always kind of hard for me to be too sympathetic when other people are saying how hot it is being from Bakersfield, but I get it. But anyway, no, I've just, like you said, been with the department for 25 years, and chief is 7.5. It's kind of funny when I always have to get the half in. It's like when you're 5 or something, you have to say, I'm 5.5. But when you're chief, you talk like that too. I don't know why, but I guess I want to get every bit of credit I can. But just to talk about a pivotal person, I actually had several, so I didn't pick just one, but it was many supervisors that I've had throughout my career in probation. And what I really learned, from several of my good supervisors was that, you can have high expectations and high standards and hold people accountable and still really, make a connection with people, care about them, make sure that they're, taken care of. There's a lot of pressures that we have at work and in life, and you really have to look at the totality of a person. And so I think as a leader, you can't let things just slide, but you can have context and really try to connect with people. And I think, I had several supervisors that I learned that with, and that's how I try to lead as well.
It's also probably very pertinent to actually the job itself, right, in probation. So it's no surprise that would kind of permeate the leadership qualities as well. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. We were just hearing from Chief Butler a little bit about some of the past, struggles and potentially lessons learned. Let's look a little bit into the present and the future with you, if you don't mind. And I'm curious, as it relates to the future of the profession itself, what do you think maybe presents some of the biggest opportunities, and maybe what might be the biggest threat, and how can the profession today mitigate any of those challenges that you may see up ahead?
Sure. First, talk about opportunities. I think right now, one of the biggest opportunities we have is really to grow our brand as probation. And, we've had so many increased mandates and responsibilities over the last decade with 109 and DJJ realignment and pretrial. We're really being pushed more to the forefront, and I think we need to take advantage of that. And we have the opportunity to explain, what probation is, and to showcase how well we do things. And we need to be proactive, at the local level and the state level. And, using social media and all these different techniques to really get our name out there. And the reason I think is important is because, probation has the unique dual roles in our criminal justice system. We're the one department that has to talk about accountability and opportunity. We have to hold people accountable when they do something wrong, but we have to provide people opportunities to turn their life around. And I talk about accountability and opportunity as short-term public safety and long-term. So, there might be an immediacy of an issue where we have to hold somebody accountable right away, and that gives that short-term public safety. But if we're able to provide opportunities and reduce recidivism, that's really where we get that long-term public safety, because there's less victimizations and people have turned their lives around. And so that balanced approach is really important, especially as the pendulum, and in my career, I've seen it several times already, where the pendulum swings back and forth. We're always kind of in the middle. And I think we need to really promote that. That's our opportunity to say, like, we're always the ones that kind of have it right. Where reform is not bad, but you have to do it, in a calculated, smart way. And I think that's what probation does. And I think our opportunity is to continue to build our brand, to say that, we are that answer. We have that balanced approach. You also talked about threats. I think, some of the threats are kind of the inverse of that, where there's several groups that are trying to occupy our space, with certain advocacy groups and CVOs, and everyone has opinion of how it should be done. And I think it's really important that we make sure that we hold the ground of this is our space where we operate. Now, it's incredibly important to have those relationships with those advocacy groups, and we can't do our jobs without our community-based organizations. But I think we got to make sure that there's not, there's a line delineated there between what our role is and what their role is. And they can't be a substitute for what we do. But I think there are threats, at the legislative level, where some of these groups have sway that could possibly, encroach on who we are as a profession. So we have to be careful of that. And how I think we should try to mitigate, that threat. The first thing to do is we got to do our job, and we got to do it well, right? And so the worst thing you can do when you're being attacked is to give the other side ammunition. So all of us, either as leaders or as line staff, we all have to hold each other accountable and make sure we're doing the right thing. We have to continue, like I said before, we got to tell our story. We have to let people know what we do, and that we're a vital part of the criminal justice system, and that, that accountability and opportunity is the right approach. We have to communicate with those groups, with the advocates and the community-based organizations. So in my experience, the more you communicate with them, the more they understand, our role is important. And even if you have some groups who don't want to hear it, at least you know what they're thinking and what they're saying. So it's really important to keep those lines of communication open. And then lastly, I think the way to mitigate it is to make sure that we hold the statutory authority that we have. We have to hold that line. And that's really where, I think CPOC is really important, in other groups where we can lobby. Because I think in some places, if they're trying to replace probation, that, as long as that statutory authority is in place, they can't really overcome that. So we have to be vigilant, I think, in Sacramento, and making sure that probation's unique and vital position is protected.
Well, I'm really glad we're recording this, because that way I don't have to say it any differently, but then to just clip everything that you just shared. So vitally important about what we're talking about in like today's setting and context in so many different types of conversations. And I should say, where, give credit where credit is due, and, the accountability and opportunity, being brought together is one of the things that that really you coined for us, Chief Miracle, at a CPOC meeting, and we have really incorporated that in a lot of our communications, because it so succinctly kind of wraps up exactly what the mission is all about, and really what the middle, as you just said, is all about, right? We sometimes, that's a bad word, right? Because it means compromise or something like that. And it's really its own path. It's really a choice, and something that can be embraced, not something that we're settling for. And probation oftentimes, I think, if I look at the past, felt a little as though that's what it was, that people settle thrilled for the probation path, but it's quite the opposite. I'm excited about the future because I think that that's exactly, what we offer is a solution to some of those longer term kind of community health and safety and welfare kind of options that people seem to be desperately looking for today, tomorrow, and we're frankly looking for in our past. So sorry, you got me on a soapbox, but you spun me up there. I love it. And hopefully this is also kind of bringing forth some questions from the audience. Please, just as a reminder, feel free to enter and use your Q&A, and we'll definitely try to incorporate some of those questions as we get going. So with that transition, I will move to Chief Washington, Marlon Washington from Marin. Right? I almost wanted to say Napa because I know you've spent some time in Napa, but we are still checking for ID because we don't actually think this is true, but he does say it's 25 years in probation. So that's what he put on his form. So that's what we're going with. And 1 year and 10 months as chief, as Chief Miracle just pointed out. You got to count every day because it does feel a little like dog years, I'm sure, as chief at times. And so a lot gets put into each and every moment. Your vacation favorite spot is also Hawaii. So we've got some similarities on the panel here. And again, really appreciate you joining us today, Chief Washington. And I know this isn't your first time on one of our panels, and so you kind of know the drill. So I'll have you jump right in and share your pivotal person within probation that has made a significant difference in your trajectory.
Yes, well, welcome. I'm happy to be here today and honored and actually sharing the stage with my last chief, Chief Mary Butler. So I did spend 18 and a half years in Contra Costa before I went over to Napa. And now I'm in Marin. So I've actually made it through a large county, small county, and mid-size. So pivotal people for me, since I have been in probation, I made that 25 years, has been 2 individuals that are currently chiefs. How amazing is that? First is John King, who has been a chief for 9 years. And I'm saying these years for a reason. And Kirk Haynes, who has been a chief for 4 years. I was at a meeting and I asked a question about the lifespan of a chief. And I knew Mary had did that 17 years, but Chief Keen has said the lifespan is pretty much 4 years and 6 months. So for me, in my tenure, I've witnessed Chief Keen's resilience as a leader. And I remember him saying distinctively at a event, he said, your legacy is what, people are going to remember you by. And that resonated with me. With regards to Chief Haynes, his continued involvement in 4 years as an influential leader and recently being appointed to the Board of State and Community Corrections by Governor Gavin Newsom. That's amazing. So when you look at these individuals, there's someone you want to mold yourself after and kind of emulate. And what I see is them being transformative leaders. And when I say that, and I watch how they present all the time, and I just see how highly qualified they both are and how inspiring they are. So that's something that I want to do for people, is reach out and motivate people and influence them to want to join probation and become a part of probation. That's why those are 2 pivotal people for me.
Well, no argument from me there, and I'm sure your fellow panelists would also agree with that. So, so thank you for sharing that. I think the question we had asked you to maybe give some thought to ahead of time, kind of follow along the lines of what programs or interventions are you most proud of implementing in your career, and why is it important for probation to always be looking for ways to innovate our practices?
So for me, I'm gonna speak to my different experiences, and it's the quick touch on my resume. In a sense, in Contra Costa, I was instrumental in evidence-based practices. I was a project lead when that all started, going to Sacramento and implementing that and encouraging staff and motivating them to buy in to actually do evidence-based practices. In Napa, as the superintendent under Mary. And I say Mary because Mary always said, don't call me Chief Butler, call me Mary. So when I say Mary, it's all full respect. But when Title 15 regulation revisions went into place in January of 2019, we were one of the first in the state to complete our policy and procedures manual, which was something that I thought bringing in our staff to work on policies and procedures and actually having a buy-in for them to implement the things. And that was very important to bringing in training, traumatic, focused on trauma-informed care, gender responsiveness, and everything that was inclusive of those new mandates. So I thought that was very innovative. And then in Marin, I want to talk about that as well. Being a transformative leader, I focused on restorative practices, community engagement, and collaboration. And collaboration is very important to everything that we do today. So for us, one of the pivotal things that we have done is what we call a clean slate program. And it actually aims to remove barriers, by clearing one's record, terminating their probation early, dismissing convictions. And we actually synchronize this, which is amazing, with a public defender's office, the district attorney's office, probation, as well as health and human services. And I mention that because this was based on a conversation at lunch, a powerful conversation at lunch that I actually happened to be on the panel for when the public defender came in. The DA, the assistant DA, actually mentored me as I came into probation. Very unique. Another assistant department head mentoring you. But we sat down and wanted to do something innovative in our community. And so what we did is what we call, where we're at his house at the Civic Center, we took the Civic Center to the community and we brought in health and human services. So we kicked it off because we happen to be department and assistant department heads of color. We kicked this off during Black History Month and we took it to one of the underserved communities. And we've actually taken it to other communities as well. And we have a list of other communities to actually engage and network with. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. And I bet people are taking notes as you were talking, I was. So I was like, okay, wait, that's a very, and it's one of the things that I can tell you, kind of advocating for probation, which is kind of in my on my to-do list all the time, right, I love that we get a chance to talk about so many innovative type programs, and because probation always seems to have a little bit of flexibility, trust in your communities to maybe try something a little bit new. You have the ability to connect to so many of the different entities, and I just think taking advantage of those opportunities really ends up sometimes planting the seed for something that ends up kind of going statewide, which I think a lot of the examples that we're talking about when we're looking back into the future probably did start in some part, just a corner of the state, right, where somebody was maybe giving something new a try. So I appreciate you sharing some of those with us. And so continuing around our horn here, I want to get in our next retired chief Stephanie James from San Joaquin. Again, just a quick reminder, you're not allowed to advocate for the benefits of probation, or not probation, for retirement. You can only talk about how great it is to work for probation in today's webinar. So thank you so much for taking the time to come back and speak with us. You have had 25 years in probation and 8 years as chief, and you can't pick one favorite vacation spot, which maybe does kind of talk to the retirement aspect, but you love Cabo and Pismo Beach. So that is both sounding very nice. Pismo right now sounds perfect with the heat in some of our areas. So thank you for sharing some of that. And you two were a past president for CPOC, so I've had a chance to work really closely with you as well, and really appreciated that time. So before I turn it over to you, will you make sure that you also hit on your pivotal person, but you can share anything else that you may want to share in your introductory remarks.
Okay, so I was having some technical difficulties at the beginning, and I had to leave from my craft room to my husband's man cave, and Karen jinxed me a little bit because I must have spent a good 5 minutes trying to get the best lighting I could and the best angle, and I had to run in here last minute, so it's funny. So I just real quick, most of you probably have heard my story, or some of you at least have. This wasn't my plan A. My plan A was I was going to go to law school and become a district attorney and then eventually a judge. And I went to McGeorge and I dropped out my first year and was like, oh gosh, what am I going to do? So I went back to my coursework. I was a criminal justice major and I was like, oh, probation, that's interesting. And so I thought, let me volunteer there and see how I like it. Well, I walked in the first day, I fell in love. Knew I wanted to make that my career, knew I wanted to retire as a chief, hopefully someday. So at the time they were laying off, they were issuing pink slips, you know, everything is cyclical. And so they weren't hiring. And so I thought, well, what am I going to do? I can't go from being a law school dropout. I was a waitress at the time to just a waitress. And so I thought, well, I'll just go back to school. I liked school. I'll go back and get my master's. Well, the way it kind of worked out, I ended up getting hired right as I finished my coursework, but I still had my thesis to write. And, you know, the only reason I was going to school was to get my job. And so we had a retired administrator from Alameda County. His name was Bob Norris, and he did some interim work as a director in our department. And years had gone by. The way, you know, as you probably know, you have 7 years from when you take your first class to finish your thesis. And the years were ticking by. I'd been at probation now probably about 4 years. And, you know, my family, no one had ever really asked me, well, are you going to finish it? Are you writing it? But somehow Bob Norris took an interest in me. And he was the only person who really motivated me enough to finish my master's degree. And, you know, he really, you know, impressed upon me how much it would help me in my career. And I think it really did when it came to different opportunities for promotions. I was able to say that I had my graduate degree. And then Bob Norris, because we had had so many conversations about school and what I was writing my thesis on and stuff, he really gave me some opportunities very early on in my career that I probably wouldn't have taken advantage of. So if you remember back, the Crime Prevention Act of 2000, we had to write a multi-agency juvenile justice prevention plan. And so he picked me, who I was just, you know, a PO2 at the time, to work on that. And that led to me being involved in some grant writing committees. And I think it really just broadened my exposure to the department very early on. So I was able to get involved and be participatory in different programs and setting up programs and writing grants and things like that. So I felt like he was really instrumental in my career.
I appreciate you sharing that. I'm sure folks who are listening, you know, that's a really important lesson too, right? You know, sometimes when a big job is given to you or project or an opportunity given and it seems overwhelming, it may be really the path to get to something that, you know, you didn't even know you wanted at the time. So, so that's a good lesson in that. You know, one of the things that always strikes me as unique to our profession is the adaptability of the profession and the people in the profession. And so we would asked if you would maybe speak a little bit on, you know, probation is constantly evolving our practices, you know, and what you think makes probation folks so adaptable, and in your observation, maybe what's changed the most in over the time your career that you noticed.
Okay, so what I think makes us so adaptable is our staff. From day one and throughout my entire career in probation, I always felt like staff were our greatest assets. We have very intelligent, they're educated staff. Most every department, you're required to have a degree. It seems like they're the cream of the crop to me, especially when I look at other agencies and their staff. We may not always initially embrace the new change that's being thrust upon us, but it seems like our staff, once something's given to them, they're going to then figure out how to make it work, and they're going to work hard to make sure that it reflects well. I think our staff are not just the quality staff, but they're dedicated and they're also caring. And it's not just the line staff, but it goes from administration and then also even having the leadership of CPOC. CPOC's been fabulous about making us adapt to the pendulum and the different programs and reforms that have come through, where maybe initially we're not in support of it, but then once we're able to be told the pros and the cons and why we maybe have to go this route, it helps us really buy in. And I think that's important. And I think that's a trait that a lot of probation leadership has, is we don't just tell our staff, you're doing this because I said so. First of all, our staff are too smart to just accept that. They question everything. And I think we've done a really good job. And the departments that I think have had some of the best success have leadership that really explain to staff. A lot of times staff think that it may just be the chief's crazy idea or a whim that they want to try something, not knowing that so much of what we have to do is required by us. A law has passed or there's something behind the scenes at the state level that maybe they just aren't aware of. And I think once we can explain to staff, sometimes they may not still agree, but at least they understand. And I think understanding is the key to having them be putting their heart into what it is that we have to do. So what has changed the most? I think there are probably 3 areas. When I first started probation, we were simply a broker of services. We just did referrals out for our clients. So they would come in, we'd meet with them. We weren't doing risk assessments back then, but we'd find out what their challenges were, what their court orders were, and we'd refer them to counseling, we'd refer them to mental health, we'd refer them to substance abuse. We didn't really provide a lot of direct services back then, 27 years ago now. Where now I think that's completely different. You can look at almost any county in the state and their staff are providing direct services to clients, whether it's cognitive behavioral interventions, or people have done victim restoration programs or mediation programs, different evidence-based programs. They're providing direct services through day reporting centers and evening reporting centers. And there's even probation officers that are assigned to classrooms where they're actually helping the youth get to school and make sure they're attending school. And so I think that's been huge, just kind of changing from that broker of service to direct service. And I think it's made our staff, it's improved the quality of our staff as well, because I think they become a little bit more well-rounded. I also think like our field work has changed. Mary kind of talked about this a little bit about arming. When I was a baby probation officer, and was pregnant a long time ago, I would go out in the field by myself with a cell phone and a pair of handcuffs. Probation's come a long way from that. I think we have very, very well-trained staff. We, typically go out in teams. We're a lot more tactical now in our equipment and our planning and briefing and doing action reports either before or after an incident. But what hasn't changed is the rapport that we've built with our clients. I think, we've always through the years understood that that's the biggest strength that we have, and what the purpose of our job is to help our clients and help them through whatever challenges. And sometimes we have to, obviously arrest them and search them and hold them accountable. But at the core of what we do, we want to help them make better decisions and help them in a better life that's not full of crime. I think the quality of our contacts has also changed significantly over the years. I know in speaking for San Joaquin County, we used to just do office visits at a window and we'd ask them just 5 little questions that lasted like 3 minutes. Have you been arrested? You still live at the same place? Are you still working here? Have you paid your restitution? And that has really evolved over the years as well, where now I think we really understand it's the quality of the contact, and we can do little mini evidence-based programming, epics type activities with them, where we can actually dig deeper and kind of give them some new skills to deal with some of the challenges that they're facing when they leave our office. And kind of tying to that a little bit, I think the last area I would say where we've changed the most is kind of our data collection and evaluation. I've always been a little bit of a data dork, but for years, and we still do to some extent, we count widgets, and that's the only way we were kind of measuring any of our effectiveness. How many searches did you do? How many arrests? How many office visits? And I think our field has come so far in that area where now we're really looking at outcomes. And if what we're doing is having the intended outcome, and if it's not, us as an industry having the courage to make changes or to even backpedal and say, okay, that wasn't really working the way that we thought it was going to work. And it's okay to make mistakes or to change your path. But I think you have to do it based not just on feeling, but actually looking at the data and looking at the outcomes.
Well, look at that. I just have to say, neither of our two retired chiefs sound like they've been that far removed from the day-to-day understanding and activity of what's going on in probation, right? So that was kind of nice and refreshing. I thought, oh, I wonder how rusty they'll sound. Not at all, not at all.
Thank you.
So I really appreciate you sharing that with us. And I probably have to move to Chief Vanini next, Mark Vanini, because, you know, I realize we're already this far into it and he's probably thinking, Karen, I'm a minimalist. Why has it taken this long to get through all 5 of us to get something out of it? But that I did that on purpose so that you would be tortured just sitting here waiting for your moment of glory. But Chief Vanini, also a former president of CPOC, has over 26 years and 4 months to be exact in probation, and has been a chief for over 14 years and 6 months to be exact. I did save him for last because Chief Benini and I have been on the same trajectory as our relationship to CPOC has been. So I'm like the twin that got born like 5 minutes before the other sibling. So I guess I'm just a little bit older than you, Chief Benini.
Just a little.
Just a little. So your favorite vacation spot is Las Vegas. So you kind of changed it up on the rest of the crew here. So thank you for sharing that. And I know you have some pivotal person in probation that you want to share, but before we go to that, I want to change it up a little bit and ask you to share, if you have it in front of you. If not, I will read it for you. I also asked everybody if they had one sentence to describe why someone should enter the probation field, what would it be? Everybody's sentence was fairly similar. So that's one of the reasons why I haven't spent much time on it, which I thought was interesting. But I really wanted you to share yours. So do you have it in front of you?
You know, I don't. Would you do it?
I'll do it. You will never get rich. You will never take the company plane to a faraway island and use the company condo, but you can and will change someone's life. And you will do that for the better. And when you do that, the feeling you get will be your reward. I thought that really summed it up well and was very similar to a lot of everyone else's, but it kind of brought it home in a very simple way.
Well, it's funny. The chief that hired me was Chief Gary Davis, was the chief that told me that early on when I started. And it's something that resonated with me all along. You know, there's other professions and other places you can go and you can make lots of money, and maybe there's a little bit more risk in things, but he basically told me that and said, you know, you're not going to get rich, but it's going to be a rewarding career. You'll be taken care of. And at the end of the rainbow, hopefully, like both retired Chief Butler and James could say, there's going to be retirement, and you will have a good retirement at the end of it all. So that's really where that came from, and it stuck with me all along.
I like it. And so your pivotal people in your past that has helped with your career?
Well, my two, again, they're past chiefs. Both at one time or another were my supervisor here locally in Amador County, and both did become chiefs. And then I was eventually fortunate enough to be a colleague of one of them, Chief Krlitich. He's since passed away, but he was Amador's chief, and then he transferred over to Calaveras. And then Mark Giannini, Chief Mark Giannini, who's also passed away. I hope that doesn't bode bad for me, but he had passed away as well. But both of those individuals were key players in me getting to where I wanted to get to, and eventually become a chief. So their continued presence within our department is there every day. So and it makes me think back when Chief Krlitich was my supervisor. He was also the training manager in a small county you wear many hats. So when Mike called me into his office and he wanted to talk about training for the next year, the 5 years. And then he asked me a question at the end, where do I see myself? I said, I wanted to be chief before I was 40, and I became chief when I was 37. So it was kind of telling, and those two, I owe a lot to them. So
I can definitely see why. Before we get to your question, I did note one of the questions that came in was just a very good one. I wanted to stop and kind of note it first. I did not do a great job in my introductions of folks because I feel like I know you all so well that I kind of raced through it, but just making sure everybody knows the county that you're currently in or have served time in. And I know that some of you have already shared that, but Chief Butler was chief of Napa. Chief Washington is currently the chief in Marin. Chief James was San Joaquin. And Chief Miracle is in Kern, with Chief Bonini in Amador. And also to just another fact that I didn't kind of start with, in case some of you are joining us for the first time, we are trying to do these webinar discussions about once a quarter. And so we've been mixing up the panelists and the chiefs throughout those offerings. And so if there's a particular area of the state that you were hoping to hear more from, there's a good chance that they've already been on or might be on in the future. And so just kind of making sure that folks kind of get a sense of the statewide perspective that we're trying to bring to these conversations. So thank you for the questions. I see that many of them are coming in, so please feel free to continue with that Q&A. I'll throw out this next question and then we'll get to some of the audience questions. So I'm going to go to the second one that I was asking you to be prepared for because I have to keep you on your toes, but it's really my favorite one. So when you were the president of CPOC at a time when we were being pulled into actually a very new role for probation, we had to try to translate our work in a political context, right? In a very statewide and public political context. And you were hitting the campaign trail with, at the time, Governor Brown. So it was kind of a little bit scary to be honest, for us as an organization to kind of start down that road and to really be so vocal in that arena. And I'm just curious, I mean, Chief Miracle had talked about one of the important things is to brand our profession and be sure that we are defining what some of that looks like for folks. How was that? How was that when you had to be out there, and why did you think it was important for us at the time to maybe engage in that endeavor?
Well, I think it was important simply because it was really the next phase in the probation profession and where we were, where we are at the time and where we were going. And in 2016, I can't believe it was that long ago, but time goes by fast. It was what needed to be done. You know, the governor had a problem. He had a problem going back to when AB 109 was put into place, and Chief Miracle had mentioned AB 109, and you know, we did have some other policy changes that we led through. So we led through JJCPA, we led through SB 678, we led through AB 109, and ultimately there was no reason why we couldn't lead through what eventually became Prop 57. And when the governor came, talked to us, we're problem solvers by nature. And through all of those issues that have come up before, it was really problem solving. So it was a matter of garnering the support of my colleagues at the time because, you know, I was a small county chief. I'd been chief for a while. I kind of understood things, but not at the level that I probably needed to. The CPOC staff was incredible. Karen was fortunate enough to recognize that we needed some help and brought in Laura Dixon to the fold. And I got quite close to both Laura and Karen and the CPOC staff through that year. But it was a different phase for chiefs to get involved in and really to spread our wings and be players at the state level. The governor knew he couldn't get this done without us. He knew we did things in AB 109 that he maybe even thought we couldn't do, and we got done. So ultimately, it's funny when you phrase that question of traveling with the governor, it really didn't happen that way. It was more or less me ending up wherever the governor went. He was the one that got the chauffeured transport. They got to drive in all the fast pass lanes and things of that nature. He would go out on the tarmac, hop on a plane, and go to the next location. Granted, it was Southwest that he flew on, but it was myself along with some of the other supporting players with Prop 57 at the time that trailed behind and made it to whatever destination we needed to make it to, and really lend our voice at the table to those conversations, meeting with major newspapers throughout the state, big reporters, doing radio, doing press releases, doing commercials, things of that nature. So it was an area that frankly we hadn't really been in the past, but it was just the next step in the evolution of our profession, and really, again, spreading our wings and becoming big boys on the block, along with our sheriffs, our chiefs of police, our boards of supervisors, and really kind of getting in there and getting things done. So we had those answers. We didn't shy away. We kept moving forward, and really the governor, in sitting down with him several times, he had said at the time, and had publicly has said, that one of his biggest, he felt one of his biggest mistakes was determinate sentencing. And he had felt that if there's a way to somehow put some indeterminacy at the end of a determinate sentence, and that offenders would earn, and that's an important piece here, would earn credits that could allow them to exit the system quicker, or at least exit custody quicker. That was something that he was interested in doing. Plus, he needed to frankly stem the flow of entry into CDCR. And then I think he realized that probation and probation officers are the ones that take a balanced approach to criminal justice and enforcement. And the days of the parole agents, the tail 'em, nail 'em, and jail 'em, really wasn't. I mean, you do have a piece of your population under supervision that you're going to deal with that way, but ultimately that is not the standard way to deal with offenders. We're trying, probation officers try to get at the root causes of issues and address those causes. So I think early on he realized we were the ones that held the answers and could do the things that needed to be done at the local level. We had proved it again with AB 109 and those other policy changes that had been made in the past. And ultimately, we're the go-to kids on the block. We continue to be that way, and I don't see us slowing down anytime in the future. And frankly, we haven't. So.
That is so true. And that's a good point. I didn't mean to suggest that you were traveling with the or part of the entourage or whatnot of the governor. But yes, you did see a lot of different editorial boards, especially a lot of other places where they were really relying, he specifically, on probation's voice. And, it's something that also strikes me as interesting. You had said, here you were, a chief from a small county and needing to be sure that you were representing, the entire state. I think, one of the things we talk a lot about in our training when we bring people in from your staffs and they get a chance to mix with staff from other counties that maybe they're not necessarily having that opportunity to do, how similar your experiences really are. And the message that all of you guys are sharing here with us today is very similar to each other. The mission, even though, there are certain specifics to it in each county that's reflective of, kind of the community and your particular tools and resources available to you. But at its core, the mission and some of that work has always sounded eerily similar, frankly, to across the state, at least to this outsider. So we're getting lots of questions, so I'm trying to think of a good way to pick a few out. And there is one that's kind of sticking out to me that we haven't touched on at all here. So while I know it could also be a little bit of a sensitive one, I think it's one that's on the minds of a lot of our staff. And it's certainly on the mind of me as well. We're in a changing workforce environment. When you think about coming out of this pandemic and really a lot of the different things that had to change, and the way in which we deliver services as well had to change, as well as people around us, how do you balance telework and the desire for people to have more telework options, and making the probation work more desirable, while other industries maybe are able to rely more on telework than we're able to, because of the core mission of what it is that we do. And so it's a challenging time, I know, for everybody, with recruitment and retention in general. So I'm kind of curious as to thoughts about that, because that could certainly be something in our future that we have to think about how to address for a workforce environment. Anyone?
I would love the opportunity to chime in on that, because I
Please.
think during COVID and the pandemic has actually expanded what we know we can do. And I think it's important to realize there are some good things and there's some bad things that have come out of the pandemic. But I think teleworking is something, in order to recruit and retain employees when we're competing with so many different industries, telework is something that we have to do. I mean, that seems appropriate, but what does that look like in teleworking? So with teleworking comes increased accountability. So with that, are staff willing to accept that increased accountability? Because the thing is, you never want to be on the news saying that you had an offender that was in the community that committed a crime, and they say, why weren't they checked on? And your answer would be, well, because my staff wanted to telework. No, we're actually into safety, community safety and public safety. So sometimes we have to have a reset and review our mission and really look at what are we charged with doing. And that's community safety. But how that looks could look very different in this new world with how teleworking in this hybrid world is. But we do have to have increased accountability. And I don't want to take too much time to give someone else a chance to chime in, but I think teleworking is something that's necessary in our field, and we're very unique in our job being a quasi law enforcement and social work.
Appreciate that. Anybody else want to add to that or take a stab? It does sound like we have to recognize it, find ways in which, to address it, which has probably always been true, right? When we look into our past, we've had to find ways to, innovate and sell and promote the ability to bring people in and recruit. But I do think we're seeing that in a lot of industries right now. So not sure if anybody has anything else to add.
I'll just add something.
Go ahead, TR.
Okay, thank you. So I think as a leader, for me personally, my dad was in the Navy, I was raised in the Navy. I kept to think outside myself. I would never, when you think telework, I'd be like, why would anyone want to telework? You got to be there, and that's me. But as a leader, you really have to sometimes step outside yourself and realize what's going on. And obviously the pandemic made us look at things differently. So the way we're handling it here is, the operations of the department are always paramount. So, our juvenile correction officer, you're not gonna be able to telework. You need to be in the facility. So, but what about our court officers? Does it make sense? And can they do it? So, and it is difficult to recruit now, and the number of people who are applying aren't as high as it was just, pre-pandemic. We have to do a lot more work to try to, get. When I first started, it was like you wanted a county job. That was like a big deal. I mean, that was like something that people really wanted, and it's just not that way. So I think we have to be, we have to realize what the reality is, and we don't need to judge, well, that's it's good or bad. We go like, well, what's the reality? And as long as we can get our work done, then I think we should try to be flexible.
You know, and I think the question, and Chief Butler, you had mentioned, you know, as to how would you, you know, what's your one sentence to tell somebody to get in probation? I mean, it is rewarding. The career in and of itself is rewarding. Now, how we do it and the, you know, the benefits day to day, I mean, that's, you know, matters to people who need to kind of consider, you know, how to come into the profession or how to stay with the profession. But I wouldn't lose that as a big piece of the selling point as far as your recruitment efforts. And Chief Butler?
And that's really what I touch on. And you know, I mean, it is a new environment that we're in. The government's reaction to the pandemic, it really wasn't the pandemic. It was our reaction that changed how things are done. And you know, shutting down the economy and doing some of the things that were done. You know, frankly, we're public safety. We need to be visible. We need to be out there. We need to be doing our job. What I took and what I continue to try to look at is not necessarily having telework. And it may work in situations where we have adult report writers, things of that nature, but it's really difficult in a small county. I mean, there's times where my court officer is arresting somebody and taking them into jail, or I'm going out and drug testing an offender. I mean, I'm the chief, but if things need to be done, and sometimes it falls upon leadership to get those things done. What I look at is trying to move, and I did this even prior to the pandemic, was move to a much more mobile environment for us to be working in. And I've talked to my CAO several times about we're a good sized department to try this, but make our department a completely mobile environment. Maybe have a couple hot desks in one of the office buildings where officers can go in and type reports. We can have offenders report to support staff, maybe have one officer of the day in this hot desk area, but everybody else, they got a car, they got a laptop, or they've got a iPad, they've got a cell phone. They have access to everything they need access to when it comes to our case management system. But let's be mobile. Let's still have those offenders being checked on, and make those connections within our community as much as possible. So that's really where I'm looking at the future, is us being more mobily available to respond wherever the case may be.
I really like that mobile concept and that's really a tangible thing for us to be thinking about as far as what's the future in some of our mission and what we look like. And, you know, and the reason why it resonates with me is we've been talking a lot at the state level about some of this mobile service center that they're kind of launching in Placer, and a lot of probation departments like yourself have already kind of been doing some things along those same lines. And what it does is it does give us the opportunity to bring government and to bring solutions to the people, which is, I think, also something that's really lacking in just kind of the way people in general look at government services. And so that could kill two birds with one stone, so to speak. But that's a great question. And I think definitely something that our future will be one of those issues we have to continue to mitigate. A couple of other questions. I'm going to just throw out this laundry list of questions sent in by one person, because I think there's something for everybody. What is the greatest lesson you have learned? What is the greatest lesson you have given? And how do these lessons contribute to strengthening succession plans for probation? So anybody want to give a stab to it? You don't have to answer all three. I won't make you do that, but if that trips anything in your mind on that.
I wouldn't mind touching on that first one about a lesson learned. And it kind of fits into things that have already been said. But to me, you know, when I first started, one of my reservations when I talked to the judges was, I said, I don't know adult probation. I mean, juvenile, I kind of know because child welfare, you do a lot together, but I don't have a clue. And their response was, who cares? Nobody cares about adult probation. And it was true back then. I mean, this is going back 20 years. And, you know, it wasn't funded by the county very well. Nobody really knew what we did. And it really was that probation was invisible. And to me, the lesson learned through my time in probation is we moved from being invisible to being the leader. And that's something we can never go back to. I'm still saying we.
You're still part of the we.
Yeah, I guess. But, to me, it's just so important to take on that role that we have taken in the last 10 years or so, maybe even longer now. And the role of being the leader, being the one who's sitting at the table, helping to make good decisions, helping to sometimes be the one who is willing to point out what is working or what isn't working when other people aren't willing to. And I think it would be really dangerous for probation to go back to that place where no one knew who we were. Now, are we all the way there? I'm going to tell you, I think it's still a challenge for probation. And, to the day I left, I felt it was something I remember when I did leave, I kind of gave my last little rah-rah speech. And it was one of the things I really encourage folks to think about was, how are you going to help promote your own department? And how are you going to promote what you do every day? Because it's so important. And it's great that your family knows about it. And it's great that your friends might know. But how does, the other people in our community know? And, just keep challenging. And I think that's something that I would like to say again, is keep challenging people to be that forefront person and really help people understand probation and not be invisible ever again.
That is really important, and probably it feels like more so right now. I mean, that really speaks to our present. There does feel like there's a little bit of an air towards, and you mentioned this, I think, too, Chief Miracle, in some of your comments that, are we replaceable? Can somebody do pieces or parts of our mission? And, some of that is, a part of being introspective and evolving and being ready to adapt. So certainly looking through some of those things, but not like slipping back into maybe invisibility, right? That is the biggest danger and threat. We can probably have a conversation about all of it, right? And we're talking about, pretrial is for some of us very brand new type of service that probation's being asked to do. And as usual, maybe we're not given enough resources to do everything that they're asking us to do. And the DJJ realignment, is got to be causing everybody on this panel, as well as those watching, a lot of angst. Like, what is that going to really look like? What is that going to do? And can we make it through that? Well, the last thing we can do is kind of we don't like it, so we just sit and kind of let somebody else decide what the future of that looks like. That's maybe not the best path, according to you, Chief Butler.
And Karen, I think you said something about advice, like giving advice.
Yeah.
For anyone watching that wants to be a chief, I think when you get to the level where you are now eligible to interview for becoming a chief, I think everyone has the years of service by then. Everyone has more or less the experiences by then. And really what it comes down to is fit and finish. When do you fit into what those persons that are sitting across the table, whether it's the judges, whether it's your board of supervisors, the CAO, the CEO of the court, whoever it is, it really comes down to that fit and finish. But from an advice standpoint, something that may not get you the job, but once you get the job, you're going to feel much better about, is learn budgeting and budgets and finance and where the money's coming from and how it gets spent and how you can utilize those funds. I was so far behind in trying to learn those things. Luckily, I had a good financial officer or fiscal officer at the time. I continue to have a fiscal officer that has helped me immensely. So get out there and learn budgeting wherever you can find out and figure those things out.
Great point. Chief James?
Yeah, one of the lessons I would say that was the most important that I learned, and it started kind of with my introductory example where Bob Norris gave me some opportunities very early on in my career. I'm a big committee person. I think in the course of my career, I was on like 150 different committees. I kept track of them because every time I'd promote, I'd be able to say I was involved in starting this new project or writing this grant. And I think a lot of times, especially the higher you go, we're so busy. Administrators, chiefs are so busy that when something new comes up, it's easier to sometimes just take care of it at the admin team level and not really get the input of the line staff or the supervisors. And you're already meeting pretty regularly. And it's like, okay, we got to deal with this. How are we going to implement it? And I really think it's worthwhile and valuable, and it'll do your department so much better if you can actually, when those opportunities arise, involve the other staff. And depending on what the topic is that you're trying to accomplish can be who you invite. Sometimes if you're looking at redoing field policies and practices, you might just want it to be all of your supervisors. But if you're looking at updating your mission statement, there's no reason that you can't include detention officers, support staff, the mail clerk, really listening to everybody's voice. And I think when you create that kind of culture in a department, it helps so much with staff buy-in, because you've got all the different voices, and sometimes you think you know everything, or you have enough experience yourself or with your admin team that you can think of all of the challenges. But sometimes we don't. We get farther and farther removed from some of the day-to-day operational type work. And when you can have those cross-sectional, cross-divisional voices all kind of coming together, but it takes time and it takes a commitment to do that. Because like I said, a lot of times it's faster to just identify somebody, hey, this is what I want, this is what needs to be done. Can you two go work on it and then come back to me? I really think it's a good investment of time and resources, and will really strengthen your department if you can create that kind of culture and give all the staff those kinds of opportunities to be involved. It helps them with growing and succession planning as well.
Which there was obviously a lot of, and we get this question almost every single webinar we do, is people are asking about succession planning, and trying to kind of get a better understanding about that. And, I think that is obviously important for the future of probation. So there are, I know we don't have a ton more time, but we do have a ton more questions. So I am going to try to get in a few more. Let's see here. Well, this is a question we get a lot as well. And so I think people really value Chief's input on this. If you are line staff trying to promote in this changing era, what are your suggestions or preparation would you suggest to have those potential peers trying to promote up? So, your best advice.
If I could start with that one, the best advice is the interview process isn't when the application comes out. It's 365 days of the year of doing your job. And also, if you want to be a part of leadership in advance, what are you modeling for staff? Integrity, trust, accountability, taking that feedback, different things like that. It's important for you to be a leader. So you have to, what I always say, as I promoted up in my career, because I started as an extra help employee, I always acted in the role that I wanted to get to. So when I was extra help, I acted like a permanent staff because that's where I wanted to aspire to. And that becomes your leadership role. I was fortunate actually when I got to Napa is that I reported directly to Chief Butler. So to Mary, I actually didn't have to report to assistant chief. So I had a significant role as being a subject matter expert in my area, but I actually didn't have a barrier there of my communication, which led me to the opportunity of having that executive leadership experience to advance to a chief probation officer. So I say you have to show up differently. So if you think as a PO, you might remain a PO. If you think where you are and just stay in that mindset. So I encourage people to start visualizing themselves in that role and think as if they're in that role and act as if you're in that role and message that with staff, and they'll learn and respect you in those roles.
I think in addition to that, kind of along those same lines, I remember some of the early interviews I did for when staff wanted to promote, and they would start with, I've been with the department 20 years, I deserve this. And to me, deserving it is more about what have you done for the department and what are you willing to continue to do for the department. So I'm very much in the same way as Marlon in what I was looking for, and I actually did a little lunch seminar. You want to promote under me, these are the things you're going to want to do. So here are some ideas. Join committees, be a part of the department. Don't just be a part of it once you turn in an application and come to an interview. It's too late because we know you. You know, it's the plus and the minus of when you're interviewing at your same department. Now, I also know that some people want to go to a different department and, you know, promote different size county, whatever. And I've often encouraged staff, which may seem counterproductive, to go. If you want to go to a bigger county, do that. And here are the experiences that'll help you get there. My feeling was, as long as they stayed in the field and we're still out there doing good work, sometimes it wasn't the right fit to somebody always stay in a smaller county. So, but I also think it wasn't about just the number of years you sat in your chair. It's what you did while you were in the chair.
Great advice. Another question that came in, and I'm going to try to maybe blend a couple of questions into it, but for departments that do not provide directed services, and, you know, was touched on by a couple of you about maybe the threat of those services being contracted out, you know, or given to even other non-probation type agencies. How does probation continue to be probation in a situation like that? And what can staff do to help? And I think that kind of talks a little bit about, like, when we keep thinking of and focusing on a strength being how adaptable we are, but are there some things that we really should continue to, you know, be very clear our probation is really best suited to deliver on? And I'm curious if anybody has thoughts in and around that.
I'll talk a little bit about it. And every county is different, and depending on what size you are and what you can do. So some of this advice may not be applicable to everybody, but I think as a department, we really have to think about what are the services that we should be providing. And then sometimes you have to do restructuring. So for example, we created our probation program specialist position in the department. And, you know, I did it at the time. I actually did some add and deletes of some probation officer positions, which, you know, it's kind of a risky thing to do, but these are non-sworn positions, but they give that direct services, you know, of the CBT to clients of our juveniles and adults. So it really gives us skin in the game, you know, to be in that area. So it's not everyone can do that depending on the size of your department, but I think it really having an idea of, hey, if this is part of the evidence-based structure, not that we have to do it all and that other people can't do it with us, but that we should be a part of it. So I really think having those conversations of what do you think probation should be delivering, and sometimes you got to make tough decisions about, you know, it's probably going to back up and give you a truckload of money just to get these new staff. So sometimes you have to make those hard decisions about what to do. But I think by doing that, we're staking our claim a little bit more.
I appreciate that. Chief James?
So in San Joaquin County, we follow the principles of effective intervention. And one of those principles is skill train with direct practice. And so I was a big believer in that all of our probation officers should be trained in being able to facilitate at least one cognitive behavioral intervention. But like Chief Miracle, I had other staff as well. We had probation assistants, and we even had some social workers and probation officers who were all kind of trained. And if you're not doing any of that, you know, it's kind of like when we started with validated risk assessments. We were the first ones kind of doing it in our industry, in the criminal justice field. They've been doing it in healthcare and other areas, but in the criminal justice area. And as you know, now there are other departments that are doing some sort of risk assessment, whether it's happening in the jails when they get booked, or the DA's office when they're determining how they should file charges, or if they should defer somebody. I can't believe I have a fly in my house. And it is, I'm sorry, I feel like Joe Biden in one of those, you know, when he had one of his debates and he had the fly on his head. So I apologize for that. Let me refocus. So, you know, and the same with there are going to be other agencies that are maybe more equipped to do certain pieces of programming. But I think if you're a department that's not doing any direct services, I think you probably really need to kind of think about that, because it does help us in strengthening the quality of our staff and the necessity of having probation. But then also, things are cyclical. The budget is cyclical. And, I don't think it's without the realm of possibility that we're going to go into another economic downturn. And when that happens and funds get tighter, you don't have as much money to be able to contract with other agencies. And you don't want to completely eliminate some of the services that you're providing to your clients that we know are being effective. So if you're not doing it, maybe you could talk about, starting one, aggression replacement training. That seems to be a pretty common criminogenic need that our clients have, is anger control. And it's a pretty simple curriculum. And I think you can get staff trained, and you can even do train the trainers, where you can then keep it sustainable within your own department. And so when you do have those budgetary implications, you're able to continue to provide a necessary service when you don't maybe have the funds to contract out, because most of our department budgets are for our staff. We don't have a lot of extra money. And certain funding streams do allow us to contract out for different services. But when things get tough, those are the things that are going to be probably the first to get cut, because you're going to go back to our core staff and what is it that they can do. So I think you need to find a balance, and I think you can start small and try and pick something that you think you can train some staff, and you may either do it where everybody gets trained, or again, you may just ask for volunteers who's interested. And there's pros and cons to obviously both. If you get people who are volunteering and interested, they might develop and facilitate a better curriculum because they want to be there. But that's something that I would really consider if you're not doing any direct services now. Maybe that's a direction you might want to think about going into.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It seems as though even if you're contracting for some of those services and collaborating with CBOs, you as the probation department are ultimately responsible, right, to the court and to our communities, and for a lot of that budget, spent. So being sure that there are ways to kind of oversee and make sure that the services, the direct services, whomever is providing them, is actually being held accountable to do and achieve the outcome that we would be held accountable for doing, I think, is another way to potentially be sure you keep your, finger on the pulse. Well, I know we ran out of time. There were a lot of other good questions, and I was afraid we wouldn't have enough questions at the beginning of this discussion, and I feel like there's still a lot more that we could talk about. So I appreciate everybody's time, both kind of watching this, but especially for our panelists for joining us and giving some thought ahead of time to the topic. I also wanted to share that we have recorded this. We will post it on our website. We will post and have posted in the past some of our other webinars, but what I think might make sense now that we've had quite a few, we'll try to put them in one spot where it'll be easy to access, because I think a lot of good advice and interesting comments are being brought forward on many of these, this one included. So with that, in the 2 minutes that we have left, any burning thing that you guys can't wait to unmute and share that I didn't touch on? Like, everybody's looking down like, no, it's 2 minutes. Get us out early is what everybody says, right?
You did an excellent job, Karen.
Thank you. I was fishing for that. Thank you, Chief Washington. You caught that pitch. Appreciate it.
And thank you for letting us retired folks come back.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. It's an honor.
Well, we had to twist all of the current chief's arms to allow you to come back and be on the panel. Chief Bonini was very much opposed to it, as you can imagine. No, teasing aside, it's so important to think about where we were, where we are today, to be prepared for where we go tomorrow. And so the one thing I can say is I have a lot of faith in everybody on this panel, all your colleagues and all the people watching, because I haven't seen a challenge that probation hasn't been able to meet. So looking forward to the future, and thank you again for joining us.